You know, in in circles that are interested in social justice advocacy, and so I'm very much of that school of atheist that believes that secular advocacy should be also about a broad understanding of issues related to separation of church and state, right? So I think that we should be engaging in, advocacy for women's rights, for reproductive justice and abortion access, for LGBTQ rights, particularly trans rights right now, which are so viciously under attack in so many American states. So, if you want to dismiss that as atheism plus, I mean, that's your prerogative, but that's what I understand secular advocacy to be. It's getting out there and doing stuff where religions are oppressing people in our society and our political system. And within that broad position, obviously, I think we do need to work in coalition with all kinds of religious people, including truly inclusive and progressive Christians where possible, to fight for separation of church and state for these issues that I see as very much related, um, and for justice. But sometimes that does create certain issues that I want to bring up during today's talk. I think I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen, and I'll show a couple of my slides, and then maybe I will then sort of pull, I didn't mean to show everyone my whole email, pull back, and I think we'll start with some open discussion in a minute, and then I'll go back and finish the presentation. But what I'm going to argue in today's presentation is that Christian nationalism is really too narrow a framework to address the problem of hegemonic Christianity that pervades American society. And I think there are ways that while still working in coalition with groups like the Joint Baptist Committee, Interfaith Alliance, and Christians Against Christian Nationalism, I think we can push back on their Christian privilege a little bit, and that maybe we should, and demand a little bit more equal respect to those of us who are secular advocates, which I think they're often well-intentioned, but just rhetorically they often exclude us, and I think in a lot of the material that's produced about Christian nationalism, it, it, it goes too far in trying to distance Christian nationalism from Christianity. And if you push back on that, people say, well, don't paint all of Christianity with a broad brush, but that's not what we're doing. That's what they're doing, right? If they want to say, well, Christianity is really supposed to be this just good, benign thing that has nothing to do with empire. Uh, okay, well, that's not the whole history of Christianity. In fact, that's definitely not most of it. Um, anyway, let's get down to a little bit further in this discussion, and I think you'll be able to see where I'm trying to go with this. So back around the beginning of this last year, I watched the film God and Country, directed by Dan Partland, produced by Rob Reiner. Supposedly, like I mean, it was very much directed toward mainstream American audiences, right? And it was a movie that was supposed to give us this historical look at how Christian nationalism led to January 6th. And it did that. But in doing that, I also personally felt that it was very defensive about Christianity, that the film was at pains to present Christianity as basically overall inherently a good thing and Christian nationalism as an aberration. And I didn't like that. And that's not because I'm claiming that this kind of oppressive authoritarian Christianity is the only kind of Christianity. But it seemed to me that they were at least dancing with the claim, coming maybe right up to the line of making the claim. And in some cases, people in the documentary straight up made the claim that, oh no, Christian nationalism isn't Christianity. It's this aberrant thing. It's not Christianity at all. And that's just empirically false, from any sort of anthropological, sociological, or historical point of view. And to me, it's offensive because this other kind of Christianity, Christian nationalism, had a huge impact on my life, and it's having a huge impact on everyone today because there's one political party of our two major parties in our two-party system that is completely captured by it. So I thought we might actually start by talking about this movie a little bit because I understand that many of you have seen it as well. And before, I mean, I kind of already gave away the game by telling you more about what I think about it than maybe I should have at this point. But I'd like to get other people's reactions to the film. So I'm going to open it up for discussion. I'm going to turn off screen sharing so you can all, look at we can all see each other on the video again. And I would just like to take audience comments on this film. If you saw it, what did you think about it? Good, bad, ugly, any opinions?
Okay, I'm gonna let everybody, because I feel like a lot of folks probably on this call have actually seen the film. We organized a group and went to a local theater that was showing it back in December of 2023. And it's interesting to me that you know, like I was actually like, oh, I think this is great because they have all of these, you know, evangelical, either ex-evangelical or like like even folks who contributed to this, you know, this parade of white Christian nationalism are now regretting themselves, but they played a part in it. They were active participants in promoting this ideology. And so it's so interesting for me to read your writing because we all walked out saying, "Oh my God, it's so great. I'm so glad that they had actual Christians there." You know, so how do you, you know, I'm sure that you have heard people say the same thing, and how do you counter that when, you know, even people like me, I was like, "Oh, that's so great. They got that perspective." So what do you say to people who think that was a great thing?
Yeah, totally fair question. And if this were a movie that was simply really marketed to Christian audiences, I think I would be more okay with it. But it was marketed towards just mainstream American audiences, and it ended up, in my view, painting a very one-sided view of Christianity as a good thing. Now, a lot of people have said to me things like, "Okay, sure, but this is something that like I could show to my mom, and maybe it might help her change her mind." And since it already exists, I'm like, well, yeah, this is also something I would actually recommend to my mom, and I think I have. I've at least thought about doing it multiple times, but um, because this is the sort of thing that I think could be good for people like my evangelical Christian mom, who has moved, has actually come around on a lot of things in a positive way. But one of the things I also say to people who make this argument is that I don't think something like a movie that ends up probably spending about at least half of its time basically being pro-Christian propaganda is it's a good way to reach people at scale. So the people who are Christian nationalists, we're not going to change their minds at scale. There simply is no way to do that. Sometimes you change their mind because they see that their ideologies, their political positions are hurting you, and they end up actually caring about you more than these beliefs. Sometimes they don't. And a lot of people lose family. I mean, I certainly have some strained relationships more because I'm queer than because I'm an atheist, but I mean, atheism would also probably be enough to make it super, super weird. Um, but I've also had some people really come around, but that takes patience, that takes individual interaction, and it doesn't take a movie holding up Christianity as a good thing to a country that already, like 90% plus thinks Christianity is a good thing. The people who need to change, whose Christianity you don't like, you're not going to reach them by saying that's not Christianity. They're just going to turn around and say, no, you're not a Christian, which is what they do, right? They think that like Episcopalians and any sort of social justice oriented Christian is either not a Christian or not a very spiritual Christian, not a very good Christian, because they're not focused on the gospel, they're focused on works, and that's bad, right? They have lots of theological justifications for the points of view that we call Christian nationalism. That was very long-winded.
No,
I'd like
you,
somebody
you're
to.
you're fine. And one of our members, Mary, she's based in Tucson, says exactly kind of what you said. This is a good introduction for those who are exploring Christianity for the first time. So, I mean, do you agree that like this is an important film for people who maybe had, because that's who you know what? Before I read your writing and before we're even having this talk, I encouraged everyone that I knew who identified as Christian or faithful to watch this movie. And for them, they were like, ah, I feel vindicated, you know? And so, but for the rest of us, it really, I mean, I don't know, like in watching it for me, it was so funny as somebody who's really been mostly, I guess, agnostic for most of my life. I mostly saw it as like, you know, this is a way for us to be informed, but also at the same time, like, I can't believe people believe this. And I was really grateful, I guess, for the way that they talked about how this has everything to do with the desegregation, or with the resegregation of our schools. Like, I'm sure you've probably listened to the podcast Nice White Parents. That was several years ago, all about like,
actually haven't, but it sounds like I
it's
should.
it's a really great documentary, or I mean podcast. I think it's maybe like 7, but it's called Nice White Parents, and it's all about how after the Brown v. Board of Education ruling came down, suddenly there was this explosion with private schools, and specifically with parents who had not really paid too much attention to their parents' education, or to their children's education, got really involved with it in really dysfunctional ways.
Mm.
So yeah, I don't know where I was going with that.
Well, I will say that I think the film can be sort of good for people who are critical thinking people trying to understand Christian nationalism, because it does go through a lot of good history that you might not know. It's history that I often bring up in my talks and lectures about the segregation academies, the Christian school movement, and homeschooling, and where all that came from, and what its political purposes were and remain, and how this sort of whole history of Christian right-wing Christian resentment, Christian nationalist ideology, the sort of Christian educational complex, and that whole subculture of Christian bookstores, Christian music industry, how they've definitely all contributed to what happened at January 6th, to the devaluing of actual facts and evidence, for example, because you have to be taught this very rigid ideology that requires you to reject certain actual facts. And I used to, when we were all talking about how, gosh, Kellyanne Conway, I couldn't think of her name for a minute, used that phrase alternative facts. I was like, hey, man, we were doing alternative facts in Christian school like way before it was cool. And I'm not even talking about the existence of God, okay? Which I'm an atheist, but you can't prove that one way or another. I'm talking about young earth creationism and all kinds of other terrible things, climate change denialism, anti-queer views, and so forth, sex negative views, and yeah. So anyway, I think it's a well-produced film. Some of the historians do a very nice job. I'm glad that Andrew Seidel was included in the film, and I like
Yeah.
his commentary, as he's done a lot of historical and legal historical research around this topic to demonstrate that the founding fathers certainly would not approve of this project. And I think that's useful. I thought Anthea Butler did a great job. Kristen Kobes Dumais gave a lot of good history. I also didn't like, though, how she also used language that distanced, quote unquote, real Christianity from Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
And I actually talked to her a little bit about that. I mean, she responded in print. She thought that I was unfair to her. And you know, I did then learn from that she certainly was emphatic that Christian nationalism is a kind of Christianity too, but her theology rejects it. And apparently they edit it in such a way that, that didn't come through. And it was just basically her saying that this isn't really Christianity or what Christianity should be.
Mhm.
So I think the movie was very much edited to take a pro-Christian stance on things. And they may have made that as a strategic decision, thinking that, okay, these are lost sheep and we can reach them at scale with a good movie. But that's just wrongheaded. There's plenty of cognitive science research and such, psychological research showing that humans just don't change their minds based on arguments. I mean, some people maybe can be exceptions because we've been socialized, and or we just have a certain personality where, yes, we will change our mind if presented with facts that contradict what we thought we knew.
Yeah.
But most people really don't, especially when it comes to something that is a very deeply held belief that is close to your identity. You don't just change people's minds with facts. So if you grow up in this Christian nationalist environment like I did, saying 3 pledges a day at school because you have to pledge to the American flag, the Christian flag, and the Bible in that order, right? And that is Christianity to you. That and the whole Republican politics, abortion is murder thing that goes with it. Um, and someone comes along and tells you that's not Christianity, you're not going to listen to what they have to say, right? And so that this movie basically does that, and they're just going to denounce it as woke and move along.
Yeah.
Um, and for them, even some of the people who are in there trying to appeal to evangelicals as evangelicals, like Russell Moore and David French, they're also just dismissed and canceled as woke,
Hmm.
from most evangelicals. So I just don't think the film is effective in that way. And then at the same time, I don't think that the Christians that you're talking about who came out of it feeling vindicated need those cookies or need that pat on the back. Because here's the thing. Most people who are interested in any kind of social justice advocacy or do any kind of social justice work, I think including often in secular advocacy, certainly those of us who see secular advocacy as something broader than just, let's get rid of all the chaplains or let's put godless messages on billboards. We understand that if someone criticizes white people, the best response is not all. If someone says some comment about, men being problematic, you don't say not all. If someone makes a comment about Christians being problematic, everyone screams at you, right? So that's what I think we need to change. Christian privilege is just as important to understand as straight privilege, cis privilege, white privilege, male privilege. If you accept that kind of analysis, critical race theory sort of analysis, or intersectional analysis, then I think we need to advocate for Christianity being in the mix because it's the same kind of privileged position as being white in America or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, so that's my reaction to the film is that it's just very much entrenching Christian privilege, and so for every person that it might reach, of which there could be a few, but again, it's going to be a very small number of people relative to the number of people who see the film. It's also going to have this effect of making Christianity look like this beautiful, wonderful thing, and just further reinforcing Christian privilege on its audience, right? And I don't think that's a good trade-off.
No. Well, and it makes me think too, and I'm probably going to make some people in this webinar angry, but we kind of need to talk about Richard Dawkins a little bit here because recently he made comments, and Richard Dawkins is somebody who my entire life I've looked up to and respected and admired. And his stance on many things these days, he's kind of taken on the perspective of the cranky old white man. And he made comments recently about how I'm gonna have to look it up now. I'm gonna try. But how like basically it was such a like crazily like you are so tone deaf with like yourself at this stage in the game. He was talking about cultural Christianity and how when he was asked, and I would need to find this, and hopefully like Lindsay's looking right now, but like he said, how Christianity culturally is more acceptable. And it was just like, holy colonizer mindset. Like, what
Right,
is
giving away the
even
whole game now, right? With Ayan Hirsi Ali said she's a Christian, and he kind of came back and said, "Yeah, I'm as Christian as she is because I am a cultural Christian because I hate those Muslims." Basically, that was the subtext, right? Like those scary brown people with a scary religion, because Christianity is not a scary religion. You know what? Christianity is a much bigger problem in the United States than
right?
any variety of Islam.
Yeah, I'm far more concerned about the domestic Christian terrorists that we have here than any kind of Islamic Islamicist terrorists or terrorists. You know what I mean? Like the cults are the
Sure.
things that scare me. I don't care what branding you have. If you're a cult, you're a cult. It could be.
Absolutely. And we mainly have a Christian nationalist, if you want to call it that, or authoritarian Christian problem over here. Most American Muslims take, maybe not always in their own lives, but certainly like when asked on like public opinion surveys and in their voting, they take more liberal stances on things. So because they are a minority religion, which kind of naturally is going to lead you in that direction, right? Because you're not privileged, because the conservatives are attacking you because you face discrimination. I think that's going to lead you naturally toward a more liberal direction. And public opinion surveys, Pew data and PRI data and such bear that out with American Muslims.
Mhm.
So it's much more of the American Christians that represent a threat to our democracy, to human rights, especially to queer rights and women's rights and so forth.
Mhm.
So yeah, I have also just been shaking my head at lots of things that Dawkins has done in recent years, unfortunately. And he's also, been very anti-trans, like all the intellectual dark web people. And um, he, it's funny because every once in a while, like the Dawkins Foundation, will reprint something that I wrote, and it's like, oh, well, I'm good enough to be there, but they're not gonna, think about maybe not attacking trans people's identities.
Right. Like they don't consider your humanity, which is weird for a bunch of, non-believers. There's a comment here coming from Diane. She says, I saw it at a liberal church in Central Phoenix. Only about 10 people were there. I hated it. Diane knows white Christian nationalism like the back of her hand, so this makes sense. I thought, first, I already know all this, so I didn't learn anything. I kind of felt the same way, Diane. Second, I thought it was extremely dark and dreary and left me with the message that there is no hope and we should all just get our passports in order to move out of the country, which is already lost. I mean, yeah. And then, yeah.
I mean, I personally didn't take it as so hopeless, but that's an interesting reaction, and I appreciate that she shared that.
I mean, I can see it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it too. I can definitely see
Mhm.
how one could come away feeling that way.
Yeah.
Anybody have any
I
more?
have another question coming
Yeah.
in from Mark, and Mark
Hmm.
says, how do mainline Christians, i.e. Presbyterian, Methodist, etc., respond to white Christian nationalism? Most, by inquiry, seem to be either willfully ignorant or to want to ignore white Christian nationalism.
So I don't know if that applies to most. It certainly applies to many. And I think there is another problem going on, which is that we kind of give hegemonic Christianity a pass on the left. And I have an example of this in my presentation slides, which I'll probably get to at some point. But um, there's just a lot of pro-Christian rhetoric that just everyone in the United States is kind of expected to accept uncritically. And I think that a lot of liberal white Christians in particular, but also sometimes Christians of color, African American Christians, have not questioned, the goodness of Christianity. Just those other people get it wrong. I will say there's a big coalition out there. I would imagine that a lot of people in the audience are probably familiar with it, called Christians Against Christian Nationalism, and they are doing workshops and things in churches that are amenable to this, which would include many mainline, primarily white churches. And boy, are they white churches! I mean, mainline Protestantism is like way over 90% white in a typical congregation. And in fact, I have a good friend who's an African American pastor in Memphis and also a college professor of rhetoric, and he's in the streets protesting all the time. He's super cool, and he likes to say that the problem with this liberal Protestant white tradition that looks back to like Reinhold Niebuhr and those people from the mid-century, um, they have no theology of race. So it's just kind of, a lot of times they just don't see things. And that's one big blind spot that they have. And I think they have a lot of other blind spots too. They're often very well-meaning. And I've known people who can kind of have gone into some of these churches and given presentations and things about social justice topics, and they have found that it has gone well, that there's a willingness to learn there. So I think a lot of these people are either probably aligned with or aware of Christians Against Christian Nationalism. Some of them are doing Christians Against Christian Nationalism workshops or studying those materials in their Sunday school classes or whatever. There are, of course, adult and child Sunday school classes. But yeah, I still think they have a lot of blind spots, and I think a lot of those blind spots come out looking at a film like God and Country, which is kind of like, what if a liberal white Christian made a film about the bad guy Christians? I mean, I don't think that is Rob Reiner or even Dan Partland, but this is the film that they made. Like,
Maybe it's oh, now I'm blanking on his name, Lucian Graves. Maybe it needs to come from the Satanic Temple. I don't know. You know.
I mean, I definitely think the film would have been better if it had included a variety of more critical perspectives. I really loved that Professor Anthea Butler really just gave it to you straight. Like, yeah, why would you expect Christianity not to be violent? Like, that was my favorite line, and something like that. And that was my favorite line in the whole movie. But there
Mhm.
wasn't enough of that, right?
Yeah.
And there was way more emphasis on, oh, look at these poor, actually very rich evangelicals like David French and Russell Moore. Oh my God, these poor dudes, they've been canceled because they're against Christian nationalism.
It's
Right?
true.
Way too
Yeah.
much of that. Way too
Eh,
much of that. And yes to the person who says every damn speech at the DNC, like, yes, it's pretty much the
All
same
right.
vibe.
Yeah.
Um,
First of all, I want to point out that I'm so excited that Rick Pidcock is here. He actually joined us a little while back, but he was gracious enough to include the Dawkins quote. I call myself, this is what Richard Dawkins said. Richard Dawkins, people. I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer, but there's a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. We in the UK are a Christian country in that sense. Um, if I had to choose between Christianity and Islam, I'd choose Christianity every single time. It seems to me to be a fundamentally decent religion in a way that I think Islam is
This is just
not.
straight up racism. I mean, we actually basically can do the experiment, right? Because we have societies in which Islam is dominant, in which Christianity is dominant, and in which Muslims are a minority, in which Christians are minorities. And we can see how the social dynamics come out, relative to tolerance and whatever. And it seems to me the data suggests there's not really much of a difference. People interpret their religions in wildly different ways in different circumstances, right?
Yeah,
So this is nonsense. And
yeah.
I'm not here to say Islam is great. I'm not here to say Christianity is great, or I'm also not here to say they're inherently evil. They just are human things that we have to deal with because they exist. They're complex cultural systems. And in that respect, I really don't think one is better or worse than the other. They're both really, in my view, not great things to base societies on.
No, I
Right?
mean,
Like,
we can open just about any history book unless it's coming from PragerU or Hillsdale, 1776 curriculum, and we can open a book and actually be like, "Oh, the Crusades, that was terrible, right? Can we agree on that? Like that was pretty brutal and like barbaric." But like,
anyway,
yeah,
yeah. And Rick, I'm glad to see you here. So yeah, shout
yeah.
out to Rick Pidcock. Thanks for that. Um, and I would recommend his writing, by the way. He writes great stuff.
One
Um,
100%. He actually came and spoke a little bit about, I think the title of the discussion was like patriarchal or authoritarian Christianity. We had another author on recently, Kate West, who talked about her upbringing in that kind of patriarchal Christianity. Now, I know you weren't here to necessarily give us like the full background, but I know that you were raised in a very evangelical setting. So, like, can you just speak a little bit about that, about what it, give just a 3-minute overview of what your life was like growing
sure.
up in that environment?
I mean, so I'm a product of evangelical Christian schools of the kind that started being founded in the 1960s to find ways to keep white kids away from Black kids when that was no longer legal in public schools and was starting to be enforced, right? So those are the kind of Christian schools I went to. Very much a rah-rah, God and country sort of curriculum. At our school talent shows, they would end with, and I'm not making this up, audience sing-alongs of Lee Greenwood's God Bless the USA. This was in the 80s and 90s. Yeah. Um, so yeah, I was raised that way, and I think it really delayed me recognizing my own queerness because I just always felt weird and sort of uncomfortable in masculinity. And I actually just became a very cerebral and kind of neurotic kid who, like, I lived in my head all the time. Um, and eventually, that led me to a long and painful process of questioning my faith and my politics and everything. And at the end of that process, I was like, oh yeah, and I'm queer too. Didn't really get to think of me about that before, but
Mhm.
that's
Yeah,
that's that's the elevator pitch.
I can't even imagine what, like, first of all, I'm grateful once again. Thank you, mom and dad, for letting all of us just not have to deal with any of that stuff. I appreciate you. But okay, so one thing I want to ask you about, were you ever part of, because like so many of these like white Christian nationalist politicians who are getting into elected office uh are they belong to these national homeschool organizations, and this like homeschool debaters thing is a real thing. Were you ever put into it? Like, did you have to do those kind of like debate classes so that you could tear
um,
down any atheist argument?
yeah, we studied apologetics. So some of our Bible class time, and Bible was a required class or required subject every single year. And yeah, some of it was devoted to apologetics. We were also directly mobilized for right-wing political goals, like on Christian school time. And I will say too, and I think a lot of people don't understand this, there is kind of a revolving door between Christian schools and homeschooling. So sometimes homeschoolers participate in extracurricular activities there, but sometimes, they're homeschooled through seventh grade or something, and then their parents send them into the Christian school. Um, So it's a lot of the same social circles. In fact, there are theological arguments going all the way back to Christian Reconstruction in the 1960s, and there's a kind of split there where some far, right-wing Christians like this think that homeschooling is like inherently superior, and they actually look down on the people who send their kids to Christian schools instead because they think God has only ordained parents to oversee their children's education, and so even sending them to a Christian school is disobeying God. It's all very silly. I mean, silly is a really too mild term for it, but it's pretty absurd. And anyway, yeah, so in school and church, I was mobilized for right-wing political activities. Church, for example, when I was 11 years old in 1991, I remember quite distinctly that the church bussed us to participate in an anti-abortion protest. There was a big nationwide one at that time called Life Chain. So we did that in Indianapolis. Christian schools. In high school, the juniors and seniors would all get to go on a field trip to uh, like the annual convention of an organization called Citizens Concerned for the Constitution. Um, it's basically Tea Party before the actual Tea Party sort of stuff.
Mhm.
It's now also rebranded as Advance America, and they bill themselves as Indiana's premier pro homeschooling and pro Christian schooling organization. Advance America sounds like a payday loan company or something, but anyway, I don't know if the school is still taking kids to their conventions. I wouldn't be surprised. And they give us, we would pick up a bunch of their voter guides. And then we, on school time, would stuff them into envelopes to be direct mailed to all the parents. So, yeah, we did some of that stuff. I mean, some homeschoolers do a lot more, but I suppose some Christian school kids also do a lot more. But yeah, I can find you examples. I don't have to think too hard to find examples. Um, I don't know. I think maybe I should go back to my slides now,
Yeah, go
and
ahead.
if that's okay.
Yeah,
And
yeah, go ahead.
let's see if I'll get a little bit further, and then we can open it back up because I want to develop my argument a little bit beyond critique of one film. So I'm going to
Gotcha.
turn on screen sharing again, and let's go back to this. Um, Come on, go into slide mode. Okay. So I'm going to pull out a few quotes from my analysis or just a few points of this film that I take issue with, and then take a step back and talk more broadly about why I think sometimes Christian nationalism is just too narrow a framework to effectively criticize authoritarian Christianity and Christian hegemony in our society. And I'll give some examples of where I see it as falling short of the kind of rhetorical framing that we need to effectively do that. And I think it may be that way by design, and maybe that's going to make some people think, oh, I might be a little bit of a conspiracy theorist. And when I say by design, I don't even necessarily mean consciously, though. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So talk a little bit about God and country here. So um, one of my critiques of this movie is that it whitewashes Christianity, and I call that the film's primary impact. And here's where I think it mainly goes wrong. When you allow numerous, quote, respectable conservative evangelicals, including Christianity Today editor-in-chief Russell Moore, totally canceled, you guys. It's just the editor of like the most prominent evangelical magazine. When you allow them the cheap grace to distance themselves from their Christian nationalist co-religionists without interrogating the authoritarian aspects of their own theology, you inevitably fail to fully account for the causes of January 6th. Those causes very much include common and inherently authoritarian evangelical theological beliefs, like the theology of male headship and female submission, of which Moore has always been a staunch defender. So my issue with Russell Moore is he really does try to be a humane person. The bar is so incredibly low, but I mean, I will say, in fairness to him, that when it came out that there are Southern Baptist pastors, this became a scandal a few years ago in connection with Paige Patterson, who basically tell women who are beaten by their husbands to just pray more, take him to church, try to reform him, suffer for God. He said, no, if your husband beats you, then you should call the police. You should leave the home and call the police. Good for Russell Moore. Lowest bar ever, but good for Russell Moore. But Moore still believes that women have this submissive role, and wives should be submissive to their husbands. The husband is the head of the household, and that does mean authority. If someone has to make a final decision, it's the husband. Now, these kind of hierarchical beliefs, Moore sees them as derived directly from the Bible. They are a part of his Christianity, and it's a Southern Baptist belief at this point too. It's dogma in the Southern Baptist Convention. Female submission. Moore doesn't see that this belief is inherently abusive. Even if some husband is capable of, despite being placed over women in the hierarchy, of sort of being nice to women and not being super sexist and mean all the time, he doesn't beat his wife. That doesn't mean that theology doesn't open up a lot of space for that kind of abuse, and that it's not inherently abusive to devalue women in this way, right? Now, you can say, and Moore does say, look, I'm against Christian nationalism. I also think women should submit to their husbands. So is being against Christian nationalism enough, or do we need to talk about other things here? Let's move on. Okay, why won't my slide go? Oh, I guess I have to click. Okay. So another issue I have is that the film lets evangelicals represent Christian nationalism as just politics, and they say that politics is different from theology. Well, I just gave you an example of why that's not true. And they even let them get away with making claims totally unchallenged, like, and this is a direct quote, oh, over the last couple of years, evangelicalism has become about politics instead of theology. The last couple of years, dude, I was born in 1980, okay? And I grew up saying 3 fucking pledges to the, sorry, was I not supposed to say that on the recording? A day in Christian school.
You're completely allowed to swear, and anybody who had to say 3 pledges definitely is allowed to swear. Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Jeannie. Yeah, to the American flag, the Christian flag, and the Bible. No, this didn't just happen yesterday. And I will also note that it's not hard to find statements that this guy, Sky Jethani, has made, showing that he is extremely anti-choice and he's anti-LGBTQ, even though he tries to be nice about being anti-LGBTQ, except but the way he does that is very awkward and tone deaf. He's like, look, there's the queer side and the Christian side, and we both need to just tone down the culture warring, okay? That's how he tries to be nice about his anti-queer theology. He's not a nice man, but he's anti-Christian nationalism. But if that's true, is Christian nationalism the only problem we need to be talking about? And then kind of my final criticism here is this decontextualization. So, the film at one point will be showing an interview from David French, who is an evangelical, and he's very anti-LGBTQ, right? And they'll have him saying, oh, it's just a shame that Christians are so partisan now. And then they'll cut to Bishop William J. Barber II, who heads the Poor People's Campaign. I think he probably is a man who needs no introduction, very pro-social justice, right? And he makes this nice theological inclusive statement that includes LGBTQ people. And they show them one after the other. And that could give you the idea that David French and William J. Barber are like on the same page about things, but they are not. And I call that decontextualization to the point of dishonesty in the service of propping up Christianity's reputation. And I have a problem with that. David French is just not on the side of queer Americans in any way, but he's against Christian nationalism. But if he's against Christian nationalism and William J. Barber II is against Christian nationalism, is Christian nationalism a very meaningful category after all? Maybe it isn't, because if they're both on the same side in something, then it must not be a very important thing. Maybe? Anyway, my sort of final conclusion here is that while God and Country may be a film dedicated to opposing Christian nationalism, it is not a film that challenges Christian privilege or authoritarian aspects of Christianity that aren't narrowly nationalist in any way. Apparently, you can be anti-woman and anti-queer, but still get brownie points for opposing Christian nationalism. The filmmakers clearly operated within a framework dictated by hegemonic Christianity. And to my mind, that is a problem that runs deeper than Christian nationalism. And when secular advocates get involved in discussions of Christian nationalism, I think we need to address that. We also need to address how we often just kind of accept this on the left. And now I want to show a video clip. It's not from 2024, from the 2024 DNC. I went back to 2016 to find this very particular language as an example. I will say there was a lot of God talk and prayer at the 2024 DNC that also made me to some extent uncomfortable, but I also think it would have been fine if they just would have been more inclusive of other voices too. Um, they were certainly more pluralist about it, right? Like in 2024, you had like a pastor and an imam and a rabbi. But anyway, this is 2016, and just listen to this language. Now, this is a liberal Democrat, honestly, probably pretty progressive. Reverend Dr. Cynthia Hale giving the benediction at the 2016 DNC, and you'll find that I think you'll agree with me. Her language is pretty Christian nationalist, or at least Christian nationalist adjacent, and yet it's in the service of the Democratic Party. Let's take a look.
School is back.
Oh, is school back?
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand and welcome Reverend Dr. Cynthia Hale, Senior Pastor, Ray of Hope Christian Church, to lead the invocation. Pray with me. Awesome and wonderful God of the universe, you are the one who created the world and all who live in it. You are the God of the nations. Each one owes its existence to you. You made America the great nation that it is, filled with a diverse, gifted, and enterprising people. We are a people who have the ability to give leadership to the world and all other nations, while at the same time operating as one nation under your name, with liberty and justice for all. Through our own human error, we have fallen short of your expectations. Instead of operating as United States and a united people, we have become divided. We have allowed our diversity to cause us to devalue and distrust each other, to malign and mistreat one another. We have permitted our privilege to make us think that we are superior to others, particularly the least of these among us. There is tension and dissension in the land. This is not your will for us, and we know it.
Okay, so let me get back to my slideshow. So lots of claims there about God making America a great nation, Americans disobeying God, and God wanting us to make America the way he wants it and obey him. I don't think that's too much of a stretch. I don't think that's a super unfair way to frame that prayer. You know, she clearly said God made America a great nation. We are a nation under his name, and that, you know, we have fallen away from his will and we know it. A lot of assumptions there. And that language is just not inclusive of secular Americans at all, and arguably not even inclusive of religious minorities, or even of Christians who simply don't think that their God and the American state have a whole lot to do with each other. And those Christians do exist. If you're not familiar with the Baptist Joint Committee on Religious Liberty, you should be. They're old school Baptists who are very staunch advocates of the separation of church and state. But this is weird, right? And yet it's not. The problem, in fact, is that it's not weird. We have this stuff in American politics all the time where basically we're arguing, the two sides are arguing about which one is more in line with what God wants for America. And I don't think that's healthy. And, you know, I certainly don't want the one party that's not captured by the authoritarian Christian nationalists to be playing that same game. And yet we do. That's hegemonic Christianity. It runs deeper and wider than Christian nationalism. And that's part of the reason I think we need to expand that discussion. A few more points. Let me talk a little bit about what I would see as the benefits of using this hegemonic Christianity framing as opposed to the Christian nationalism framing. And then, you know, I would love to hear from people whether they agree, disagree, especially if you disagree. I want to know why. You know, this is a sort of new framework that I'm feeling out, so I would love to receive constructive criticism or pushback on it, and hopefully have a vigorous discussion. But so the argument that I'm making is that if we talk about a bigger category like hegemonic Christianity or even authoritarian Christianity, even though those aren't exactly the same thing, in both cases that would subsume Christian nationalism, right? It's the most obvious example. And yet this reframing can also reveal what the Christian nationalism framing continues to obscure. And I hope that by looking at God and country, I've shown us what often is obscured with the Christian nationalism framing, which is LGBTQ rights, women's rights, and so forth, that, people can oppose Christian nationalism, but also still be on the wrong side of history on those things. Reframing this also shifts our focus to how Christian power and privilege play out at the grassroots and in individuals' lives, making it easier to discuss precisely those issues, right? Like how Christian hegemony harms queer and non-religious individuals as well as religious minorities. And also, I would add women. Moving on. And this is where you might think I'm a little bit of a conspiracy theorist. I don't think I am, but again, I'm willing to hear arguments to the contrary. Recall that the sociologists who gave us the Christian nationalist framing are Christians themselves who have at times shown themselves to be defensive about Christianity, a framing that allows them to distance themselves from bad Christianity without interrogating their Christian privilege upholds hegemonic Christianity. So yes, I am talking about people like Andrew Whitehead and Sam Perry here. And at the same time, I want to say I think it's very important that they gave us a way to talk about problematic Christianity in the public sphere. Because before, nobody was breaking through who was trying to be critical of Christianity at all. But I have also seen these guys and their fellow travelers get very defensive about their own Christianity. And they will say always, if you ask them, oh yeah, Christian nationalism, it is a kind of Christianity. We're not saying it isn't. But in their writings, in their social media engagement, they often just walk right up to the line where you would say that, not quite say it, but definitely make it seem like, Christian nationalism is somehow not as Christian as their sort of liberal Christianity. And I think they open up space by doing that to give people who have worse Christianity, like David French and Russell Moore, a pass. They gave themselves an out, and that out left room for conservative Christians who are opposed to LGBTQ rights to gain respectability by saying, oh yeah, but I'm opposed to Christian nationalism. And again, queer rights is an example here. They also tend to oppose women's rights. And they tend to not have great records on race. Might be a little harder to pin them down on that. But anyway, that's the argument I'm trying to make here. And then, this hegemonic Christianity framing also allows us to talk about how, for example, the DNC is affected by Christian hegemony, and yet Americans still consistently rate Republicans more friendly to religion than Democrats. In my view, the only way for Democrats, liberals, and progressives to win this game is to stop playing, right? You're never going to win the "we're as Christian as you" argument with the Republicans, and it's a stupid argument that clearly should not be had in the public sphere in a country that supposedly separates church from state. Finally, a truly pluralist society must rid itself of any hegemony, religious or non-religious, vaguely religious or tied to a specific religion. It doesn't matter. If you have one group that gets to dominate the others, then you're not fully actualizing democratic pluralism, in my view. So that really is where I've wound up my argument. And now I would love to hear your responses, comments, questions, criticism, pushback. So yeah, let's see if I'll got to figure out how to stop the screen sharing again. I got to get on the Zoom app, and there we go. Back to regular video.
Okay, so we do have a question that came in coming from Mark. He asks, couldn't one show that belief in divine humans, i.e. Christ, leads to us worshiping ministers? Great question.
That is a great question. And I mean, the only thing that I would say in contrast to that is, I mean, we do have a lot of empirical evidence that while celebrity culture is a huge problem, including in more social justice oriented churches, I think you do have some really healthy church communities that to me would indicate that it's not inevitable. I do think it's something you really have to resist though. And for me, it's just why use the whole Christianity framework. It's too full of problems for someone like me, but for people who really find their own empowerment and joy in reclaiming Christianity, I don't want to take that from them, but I do want to ask them to be respectful and inclusive when they're working with secular advocates, for example, to maybe not say, oh yeah, we all have disobeyed God and we all know it.
Yeah.
Maybe work on that.
Yeah. Rick Pitcock says God and Country director Dan Partland told Brad Onishi, who is another prominent ex-evangelical straight white American Jesus, is his podcast. So he says that Dan Partland told Brad Onishi, we have to deliver the point that this is not Christianity, but a political movement, and prohibit the Christian nationalists from hiding behind the shield of saying, this is my faith. What we need to correct for is the assertion that this has anything to do with religion. This has to do with politics. And if it's politics, then it's open to being criticized.
Oh,
Great.
that sweet summer child. Look, I hate to say this to you, Dan, actually I don't, but that is their Christian faith. That it's all integrated. There's like no magic bright line where religion ends and politics begins. Find me one expression of religion anywhere that's not in some way political.
It's true. And like all I could think about actually was Rick's discussion earlier this year where, but I love the fact that you both use terms like patriarchy, hegemony. I mean, it's just, it's so obvious, like to the rest of us all, like this is designed to put a thumb on people and to control them. And it always has been. It always has been. Yeah. So let's see. I did write something down here. It definitely if you haven't listened to Nice White Parents, the podcast, and I'm not receiving any kind of royalties for this, but it so goes along with like what you're talking about and how all these nice white parents were absolutely terrified that their kids might have to share space with students of color. And it is interesting to me that in God and Country they talk about that, right? But then they talk about how they pivoted to abortion as their issue. So maybe you could like how like I don't know. I'd love to hear your take on that kind of pivot from like, okay, we don't really hate Black people or people of color. We just hate abortion. Can you talk to that a little bit?
I can speak to that. I'll also say, I have no financial relationship with Rick Pidcock or Brad Onishi, but I'll also, I like straight white American Jesus. I think it's worth listening to. I like Brad as a person. I have met him. He's cool. We don't always agree on 100% of everything, but yeah, that's a good podcast. It's a solid podcast. And full disclosure, I have been on it a few times, but not recently. Invite me back on, Brad.
So how did I mean they touch upon it a little bit but that how did I just wonder how they like figured out I don't know, they talk about it in the movie, but going from like, okay, we don't want to abort babies from like we really just don't
I can definitely speak to that. So it's part of this whole time when you start to see these right wingers build coalitions, including across the lines of Protestantism and Catholicism, like the mid to late 60s into the 70s, and it really starts to bear fruit in the 80s. But the 70s is a time of a lot of institution building. I forget exactly when the Eagle Forum is founded, Phyllis Schlafly's organization. I think it's a little bit earlier, but of course, she opposes the ERA, right? A lot of evangelical women get involved in that as well. But abortion becoming the big thing they rally around as something to replace race, but they get to keep the same politics, but now not say the quiet part out loud, because now, you fast forward to Reagan, you have to talk about, welfare queens and their Cadillacs and that, and you don't say Black people, you say states' rights. Look, it's the Southern strategy. It's what the Christian right did with it. I mean, we all know that famous quote from Lee Atwater, right? About, you start in politics and you can say N-word, 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 and all the white people vote your way. But then then you get canceled for that's obviously not what he said, but that's contemporary lingo. But then you can't do that anymore. So what do you say? Oh, you say busing, you say states' rights, you say abstract things. So here's what happened in these kind of Christian organizations, Christian churches. You had Jerry Falwell, right, Senior, was one of the big guys to rally around abortion as a cause first. When prior to that, and we can easily show this, even in the years following Roe, like up into the late 70s, you had a lot of Southern Baptist pastors and other evangelical pastors either being sort of neutral on abortion or ambivalent about it, or even saying that, it should be legal, at least up to a certain point. And then that changes overnight. It's quite a remarkable social phenomenon. But there's a whole lot of organizing going on, both openly and behind the scenes. Falwell is strategizing with a major Republican strategist named Paul Weyrich, whose name you may recognize as one of the founders of the Heritage Foundation. That's part of all this institution building that's happening in the 1970s. Evangelicals are building up a lot of their own institutions in the 70s too, right? They're starting things like Focus on the Family. And then all these things, become part of this big political lobby. They realize that they have lost the battle for public opinion, for hearts and minds, on taking out and out segregationist stances. They need a new rallying cry, and I would say that it's above all Paul Weyrich and Jerry Falwell who managed to successfully make abortion that rallying cry. Yeah, and so I think there's still a question up to the 1980 election of how well this would work. After 1980, there's no question, right? Reagan just sweeps in, decimates Carter, huge national realignment, huge landslide election. And interestingly, Reagan also used the slogan, "Let's make America great again."
Oh my gosh, like that's everybody's calling right now. If you haven't read the novels, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the, gosh, I can't remember, but Octavia Butler.
Mhm.
I read that in the summer of 2020. And I was like, what? Is she a soothsayer? How did she know? And I actually had to go back and look, and it was certainly Ronald Reagan who said he was going to make America great again. But I was like, oh my God, she's talking about 45 right now.
Yeah.
Good novel. I mean, really depressing and way too accurate, but really good novel. We are at 1 o'clock, so I want to honor every Parable of the Talents. Thank you, Samantha. Parable of the Sowers, Parable of the Sower, Parable of the Talents. Read it, and you'll be like, she's a psychic, and I don't believe in that. So anyway, so to end today, because we look at the world, and while we now suddenly have this newfound injection of hope and joy at the national level, I still am struggling to feel it at the state level, and especially if we're in a state that is a swing state or who the GOP has had, and we're nonpartisan, but when evangelical extremists have total control over the House and Senate in their, legislature, it's devastating. So how in times like that, especially for people like Tennessee, Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, even Arizona, how do you maintain hope? How do you keep hope?
Yeah, it's a tough question. And I mean, in 1980 is when this particular form of Christian hegemony and power started, right? Because in that election, the Christian right became this very important constituency of the Republican Party. It has dominated our politics more and more ever since. I think I personally maintain hope. Well, I moved to a blue state, so there's, but yeah, sorry, not sorry on that. But I see hope in young people. I see hope in all of this, like, insistence that we are not going back. I see hope in how, since Roe was overturned, every time abortion's been on the ballot, reproductive justice has won. And I think it is very much on the ballot this fall. Now Trump's trying to backtrack and say, "Oh, I won't sign a national abortion ban." He will, and everyone knows it. This isn't going to work for him. So I feel like, it was very unfortunate that we had to lose Roe for so much of the public to get that they meant business, when people like me and you always knew it. But now everyone knows, and it's not playing well for them politically, despite the unfair advantages given to Republicans by the Electoral College, which I think we should abolish. But that's a whole other discussion, and it's nearly impossible to do.
Hey, I asked you to end with hope, and then you pivoted to Electoral College. I mean,
I'm
like,
sorry, I'm kind of a professional pessimist.
I think a lot of us on this webinar probably are. So thank you so
But I
much.
do actually I have more hope than I've had in a long time. Let me say that.
I'm so happy.
And activists like you are actually a big part of it. Like, I
Oh,
really admire you folks who do so much work at the state level to fight the good fight. I'm not strong enough to do it. Like, I ran away, but I admire you.
you know what? Okay, and on that note, if you appreciate activists like me and Secular AZ, and you want to contribute to the good work that we do, boy, oh boy, do we need help, because our legal department has seen a 300% almost increase in complaints, because they know if they file in the federal courts, they can go all the way to SCOTUS. So if you aren't already supporting us, to those of you on the webinar, please do. And I believe that Lindsay is putting out or going to be mailing a survey for y'all, because we're trying to get better numbers as far as tracking what interests us. So thank you so much, Chrissy
And
Stroop.
also, let me say, if you
Yeah.
have little money left over after supporting Secular Arizona, I would greatly appreciate paid subscriptions to my newsletter at www.bugbeardispatch.com. If you've, if you're interested in helping me keep doing my thing, that's the way to do that. Thanks.
And it's a great publication. I love Substack and I love the work that you do, Chrissy Stroop. And I can't wait until your next conference in Tempe and we'll get to have breakfast again together.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
All right,
Jeannie.
sounds good. Bye, everybody. Have a great weekend. Take care.